Welcome to the Music Business Buddy, the podcast decoding how the modern music industry actually works. I'm Johnny Amos, industry consultant, artist manager, producer, educator, and author of The Music Business for Music Creators. Every Wednesday, I explore the ideas, technology, and industry shifts shaping the future of music. This show helps creators navigate the rapidly changing business of music.
Hello everybody and welcome. In this week's episode, I want to talk to you about micro-licensing. Now, it might be a new term for some of you. It might be a term you've heard before, but I'm just going to explain its relevance in this week's session because I boldly predict that it's going to become a much bigger thing in the next 5 to 10 years. So I'm going to go into what it is and what you need to be aware of moving forward. But let me start with a question. Are you watching less television than you used to? Have a think about it for a minute. And by that, I mean network television, cable television, satellite television, that kind of thing. If you're consuming your content in other forms away from that, if you're kind of watching less legacy television, if you will, and more content on tablets, on phones, on laptops, etc., then actually your habits fall in line with millions and millions of others. Now, that's fine, right? Because things evolve. I would include myself in that bracket as well. But here's the thing to think about, right? Over the years, the music industry has become very accustomed to making a lot of its money through the media, right? Now, the creator economy is not only changing music, but it's also changing media. Now, our habits are changing in media, and our habits have already changed in music. To boil that down to something simple, it is this. The old model of sync licensing in music still exists and it still works, but it's becoming dated because of the way that we are consuming media. So what we need to do is to actually shift to an entirely new infrastructure that caters for it. And that is where micro-licensing enters the picture. So at its simplest, if we think traditional sync licensing involves negotiations, sometimes even lawyers and music supervisors and chains, kind of like buying a house, right? There's like a big, long chain to it. If that chain isn't there, and instead it's smaller, faster, more scalable and instant, then it becomes easier to work with. And that's micro-licensing, right? So I'm going to go into a bit more detail on what that actually looks like. Now, instead of thinking of a song and its associated recording as getting one big kind of placement on, let's say, a Netflix show, instead, it's about maybe getting thousands, maybe even millions of micro usages. Now, as we know, modern media creation has exploded in recent years, right? In a whole manner of different ways. So if we think about some of the roles that exist in this era, we need to think about how music licenses itself for those users. Because if we go, well, this song gets used over here in front of a big audience, the PROs understand what that looks like. So if you perform live and you play in front of 10 people, your PRO is not going to pay you for those song copyrights as much as you would get if you were playing it in front of 10,000 people. Easy maths, right? Therefore, if we see independent filmmakers, YouTubers, content creators looking to license music at scale with a lot of use, the pricing model is not always there for them at the minute. And actually, it means that they're going down other routes by using AI-generated music, all that kind of stuff. Now, if they can find a way to actually license something for a much smaller fee, they're going to be more inclined to use it. So let's imagine that you've got somebody that makes, YouTube content about health and fitness and going to the gym, right? One of the things that would surely help their content is if they can license a song like Survivor's Eye of the Tiger, right? It will just grow that piece of content a lot easier. And right now, that's probably quite difficult to license. But what if it wasn't? What if for one fraction of what you would normally pay for a bigger sync license fee, you could pay a micro license fee, which still remunerates the rights holders, but on a much smaller level? That is micro licensing. So now we're seeing TikTok creators and YouTubers, live streamers, indie game developers, AI creators, social editors, virtual worlds, podcasts, creator brands, indie filmmakers, short form video at massive scale. Traditional licensing systems were not designed for this, and they are struggling to actually understand how the platforms build themselves inside of that ecostructure. Therefore, the music industry is being forced into changing the scale of how it licenses music. And again, that's where micro licensing comes into the picture. Okay, now here is why micro licensing really matters for music creators. So micro-licensing potentially creates a long-tail revenue economy, right? So instead of relying upon one huge placement, artists may eventually earn from thousands of smaller uses. And this is why it's becoming more important now. We are at the intersection of three pretty major shifts, right? We've got the creator economy explosion, so millions of creators who now need music, and traditional sync systems that can't scale fast enough to keep up with it. We've then got the AI content explosion, so AI generated content could massively increase things like video creation, digital environments in general, and that sort of infinite demand for licensable music. And also the rights infrastructure. We know that this is starting to improve with metadata and blockchain, AI search, and rights databases are getting much more sophisticated. So that enables automated licensing at scale. Now, this is a fascinating subject, but we need to be able to not be reactive to this, but actually prepare for it properly, because there are some problems that potentially could come with it, right? So let's have a look at those. Micro-licensing could create value dilution. So some people might fear that music becomes too cheap, right? So if it becomes too cheap, it becomes hyperscaled and it becomes automated. It could change the way that music value is perceived, because people might forget that actually it's catering for a smaller audience rather than a traditional larger audience. The rights complexity, I've talked about this on a lot of the podcasts, right? Music rights are already pretty messy, right? Publishing, territory, different territories having different kind of systems on collection, performance rights, neighboring rights, masters, of course, as well. Scaling micro licensing globally is going to be pretty difficult, right? Not impossible, but it's certainly a tall order. The other thing is this, right? AI and ownership chaos. Now, as AI generated music increases, it becomes much more fragmented as to who owns what and how creators are being paid and how rights are being tracked and all that kind of stuff. Now, I wonder if we start to see independent music distributors that actually build in the API of other companies that can offer this kind of scale. So imagine uploading your music to, let's say, TuneCore, Ditto, DistroKid, somewhere like that, and then being given the option to be able to say, right now they give the options to be able to say, do you want this delivered to social media? Do you want content IDs? That's great. That's not really what I'm talking about here. What I'm talking about is, can this be scaled into media by having a distributor who's already got the metadata of who wrote what and who owns the recording? All that metadata for ownership is within a distributor. So if a distributor can build in partnerships with other companies that can actually offer this at scale, then an instant clearance process could actually become quite viable. So then that leads us on to a really interesting shift, and that is this. Micro-licensing may fundamentally shift music from high-value, rare placements into high-volume, continuous utility. Now, that is a completely different conceptual shift. Can it happen? I don't know. Maybe. I don't necessarily feel like it's something that replaces something that came before. It's more about coexistence. So not for 1 minute am I saying, oh, those days of the big sync placements are gone. I'm saying that this is another system that kind of works towards supporting creators that are not on big channels or on big networks that can still license music. So it's not like it's just a different market, right? It's not like it replaces what's currently there. It just coexists. At least that's how I see it, unless I'm missing something. Now, what I've tried to do with this is to look at who the early market movers are in this area of micro licensing. And I think there are a few, but one really, really caught my eye, and that is a company called Chordal, right? So Chord AL, Chordal, right? They're not paying me, by the way, to mention them. They came up in my research in three or four different sources, and they kept getting led back to something that they've built, which I think is very interesting. So let's take a look at what they do. All right, so here's their website, and they've got some proprietary information on instant clear, right? So if we look at what they actually do, what we can see is that they've already started to do this, right? So 189,159 clearances, fractional payouts, and counting. And you can see here that they're dealing with a lot of different brands, right? So what they've got is they've got something that also is built into TikTok, which allows for content creators to be able to license music very, very, very quickly. Now, here's the thing, right? If you click on over here, you've got instant clear on Chordal and then instant clear API. This falls in line with what I said about distributors a moment ago, because if the API is there, and it clearly is, and it can be built into other partnerships, then that is where we could see this kind of start to move up a little bit more in scale. Now, what's really interesting is this. If we go over here to the creative suite, what we can see is for music companies, for music supervisors and content companies, and then we've got this for artists, songwriters, and managers coming soon. Now, this is the thing to always keep in mind, right? What I'm referring to here, when I talk to you, it is about rights holders, is about the remuneration to rights holders of your music, your songs, and your recorded music as separate things. Right now, that is a very, very valuable asset class, right? We know this. You've worked so hard to try and make the music that you've made, and it will have an audience if it's marketed correctly and if it's good enough, right? Now, if we're not careful, a system like this could work to, if you will, make the rich richer. And that's not necessarily something that we would want to see, because we want to see an artist-centric ecosystem, right? It's therefore interesting to me that we see this section here for artists, songwriters, and managers coming soon. So I have reached out to Chordal and invited their CEO onto the podcast. Hopefully, we're going to get him to come on in a few weeks' time, because I'd like to ask him about that particular feature. Because if this is something that's only really there for big music publishers and big record companies, I mean, maybe it's just been tested out on that, but it looks to me as if they're very, very keen to work with independent rights holders, i.e., independent artists, songwriters, producers, etc. People that control independent rights. Now, if this were a system that you could sign up to and upload your tracks and put in your metadata and make it available, then that opens up a world of new opportunity. It makes everything faster, everything more scalable, all the things that I talked about earlier in today's episode. So I will keep you posted on the Chordal thing and any other market movers in that area. So there it is, everybody. Micro licensing in a nutshell. It's good to start thinking about this, because whether it's Chordal or whether it's somebody else, there will be a major market shift. And I think it's going to happen fairly quickly, because music has to fall in line with media's new habits, right? And how we're consuming everything. And right now, music's a little bit behind the media in regards to how it licenses that. But it can catch up. Maybe this will be the solution. Who knows? Until then, have a great day, everybody. Thank you for being here. May the force be with you.